Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky joins us now. Senator, we got a lot to dive into with you. Appreciate you joining us. Let me just start here right off the top. How is the budget and border bill process going? How does the timeline look to you? How would you assess it at this point?
I'm worried. I'm very worried that they're wanting to add $5 trillion to the debt ceiling. All the good news we've heard about Elon Musk, about cutting contracts and cutting foreign aid, all that has been so energizing to our base, to conservatives like me. We jump for joy, we cheer. And then they say, well, but the bill's going to increase the debt ceiling by $5 trillion. We say, well, how is that possible? We thought we were cutting spending. Why would we increase it more than $2 trillion a year for the next 2.5 years? And there's not a good explanation. And so I've told them I won't vote for any bill that adds $5 trillion to the deficit. That's not fiscally conservative. Now, I'll vote for the tax cuts. I voted for them in 2017. I'll vote to make the tax cuts permanent. I'll vote for spending cuts. But I didn't vote for the spending, and I'm damn sure not voting for adding $5 trillion to the national debt. I just think that's outrageous, and people are going to wake up. People who listen to your show are going to wake up in a couple of months from now and say, my gosh, I thought we voted for something conservative. I thought DOGE was cutting all this spending, and yet they're still going to add $2 trillion to the debt this year. Something's not right.
You know, Senator Paul, appreciate you being with us. We've played for the audience some sound bites from years past when people like Nancy Pelosi, Barack Obama, and other very high-profile Democrats talked about stopping fraud, waste, and abuse in government spending, reining in unnecessary spending. So we know that they've said stuff like that, but to where we are right now, it seems like everything that DOGE tries to do in terms of recommendations to the president, and then everything that Trump tries to do to rein in that spending, Democrats oppose. Are there any Democrats in the Senate who do want to cut spending? In all honesty, is there anyone who actually wants to see that number go down for anything other than the military?
Zero, nada. No Democrat in the entire body of Congress will vote to cut even a dollar. So I had an amendment last week that would have cut about $16 billion out of foreign aid. Foreign aid is about $40 billion. I would have cut $16 billion, so a little less than half. And this was to represent what DOGE was doing, what Elon Musk had proposed, what really Secretary Rubio has already said. He's canceling these contracts. I would just put it into law. Zero Democrats voted for that. But even worse, about half the Republicans voted against me as well. I got a little over half of the Republicans with me, about half the Republicans against me. And the reason I put it forward was to show that even low-hanging fruit, even $2 million for sex changes in Guatemala, $300,000 for food justice for queer and trans farmers, crazy stuff like that, you can't even get all of the Republicans on board, but you get zero Democrats. So we still have a problem. And I'm the lonely voice crying out on this because people are going to be disappointed and they're going to be upset and they're going to be saying, what happened? What happened to the Republicans when the end of the year rolls around and there's still a $2 trillion deficit this year and the Republicans are anticipating another $2 trillion the next year? That it just shows that there is not a true seriousness even on the Republican side.
How much of this is the embedded cost of COVID becoming standardized in budgets going forward? Because we had Senator Ron Johnson on, and he's talked about this quite a lot, that if we just went back to budget spending 2019, that we would have a balanced budget right now. Now, I know inflation has risen since then and that there are other costs that continue to grow, but it does seem that the growth of the federal government has now been embedded, which is what Democrats wanted, in all future budget bills, with the idea being anything that doesn't continue to grow those rates is considered to be a massive cut.
I think that's true during pandemic. You know, the deficit went up to $3.5 trillion in a year. The deficits have come down. Yes, remember Biden was bragging he's bringing the deficit down. Yeah, well, from $3.5 trillion to $2 trillion. But a lot of that spending got embedded into government and still there. But realize that those pandemic programs, all those free money that was passed out, all the checks that were passed out, That was all the Democrats and most of the Republicans. That was a bipartisan screw up, if you will, to lock the economy down, just print up money. I opposed every bit of it, every bit of the CARES program, the PPP. I said, you shouldn't lock us down. We shouldn't do this. And we did. And that's part of it. But part of it is this disconnect that people will say, oh, they love Elon Musk. They love the cuts, and they're not for, transgender surgery in Guatemala. They're not for all these crazy trans operas in Colombia. But when push comes to shove, there are at least 10 or 15 Republicans in the Senate who love foreign aid. They think it's the best thing since sliced bread. I think it's one of the worst and most egregious of all the spending we have in Congress. And yet, if they won't cut that, you then say, well, will you cut any of the entitlements? Will you look at Medicare or Medicaid or Social Security or food stamps or welfare? Oh, no, they're not looking at that either. And you start to wonder, are these Republicans really conservative at this point? And mind you, there are zero Democrats. I admit that. There are zero Democrats. But we're trying to pass something this spring that will be only Republican votes, and yet we can't get Republican votes even to have the states pay more of their fair share. So Medicaid, normally it's 50-50. States pay 50, federal government pays 50. But when they expanded Obamacare, they expanded Medicaid, and they made it 90% federal government paid for and 10% states. If we just went back to 50-50, saves $500 billion for the federal government. And it makes it a more conservative program because the states traditionally have to balance their budgets. They don't have a Federal Reserve. And yet we've got 5 or 10 Republicans in the Senate that won't consider any changes to having the states pay more of their fair share for Medicaid.
We're speaking to Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky. Senator, is there anything that the Trump administration you think could do or you'd like to see them do, whether it's leading the charge to try to get something through involving the Congress or just in an executive capacity using executive orders to try to tackle some of these problems? Because on the one hand, it's great that we have an administration that's trying and, you're trying. But on the other hand, if this doesn't work with Trump and Elon, people like you in the Senate, what hope is there for it to get better in the future?
Yeah, so I don't blame the administration at all. This is the best administration we've had in a lifetime. He's picked the best cabinet. They are action players. They're not waiting around. I was with Robert Kennedy for breakfast this morning. He says he's cutting 10 to 20,000 workers over there. They're consolidating programs. They are doing what you would do as a CEO to clean house. So I don't blame the executive branch at all. The one thing they could do, though, is as they're finding savings, DOJ says they've saved $140-some-odd billion. They should send that money back to Congress. It's called rescission. It has a special name, but it can be voted on by a simple majority. And some of them say, well, we're worried that 4 or 5 of the big government Republicans in the Senate won't vote for it. That's when President Trump should use his political capital. He should come to Capitol Hill and say, I'm sending you $50 billion in cuts. Every month I'm going to send you another $50 billion in cuts. And I need you as Republicans to pull together on it. Instead, the pressure is coming to me to say, why won't you vote for a spending bill that attaches $5 trillion in new borrowing? And it's like, really, it seems like we're at odd purposes here, that on the one hand you have Elon Musk and DOJ cutting. On the other hand, they're pressuring conservatives like me to vote for $5 trillion in borrowing. Something doesn't fit here.
You see the New York Times over the weekend, 10 days ago or so, 5-year anniversary of COVID. I know you haven't forgotten about it. Said that we were misled by where COVID might have come from, and in some of our responses.
We were misled by the New York Times.
That's right. I want to give you an opportunity to tee off on that because you were one of the first people to test positive for COVID. And the way that you were treated, the way your family was treated, frankly, was unacceptable. And now 5 years later, I do find it very interesting that the New York Times, like you said, comes out and says, we were misled. It's like the arsonist saying, boy, somebody's really lighting fires around here.
Well, the next step, to sort of coming clean would be to say not only were we misled, but we were misled by our government and by media establishment figures who parroted every move and word of Anthony Fauci. He was wrong virtually on everything. 6 foot of distance, he's now admitted doesn't work. but actually it was bad advice. It was probably bad advice if you were older and overweight or of any kind of sickly nature to be 30 feet from somebody in a closed room during the height of the pandemic. You probably should have been told to stay home. But 6 feet of distance, you didn't need that for kids at all. You can put them all together because guess what? Kids got it very readily, but they got over it very readily. So the idea that kids were a danger and somehow shouldn't be in school or should be 6 feet apart, and we should build these monstrous 1,000-acre schools so the kids can all be 6 feet apart, no science behind it. And it led to bad behavior in the form of adults who were at risk, and then inappropriate separation and school closure on the other end. The masks. They told people wearing a cloth mask was a good idea. So elderly people went in to feed their elderly spouse with a cloth mask on. Guess what? That's bad medical advice. That's how you catch COVID. The cloth masks don't work at all. But they went years telling people inappropriate, unhealthy behavior. And then the one thing they really failed on was once you got COVID, they should have reassured you that you didn't need a mask, you didn't have to worry about catching it again, and that the chances of you dying were basically zero. After you've got it and recovered, the chance of getting it again and dying are virtually zero. And there were a lot of good, hardworking people working in meat packing factories where they all got COVID early on. Instead of bundling them up in all this hot clothing, we should have been saying the good news is when you come back from work, when you've healed up in a week or two, guess what? You're not going to get it again, and you don't have to wear all this BS protective gear.
Is there anything that can be done or you think will be done? You said you just had breakfast this morning with RFK Jr., who's running HHS. I worry, Doc, that, well, you are Doc as well as a senator. But I worry that the doctors out there and the medical establishment has not been forced to finally admit that they were wrong. And as a matter of government administrative policy, have these things changed. I mean, it should now be, to me at least, HHS should have officially, hey guys, we looked at all the data, masks don't work. This is on the HHS website, just so you know. Is that coming?
You know, that's a good point, and I'm going to keep fighting that battle as well. But the other way to correct it is like all the soldiers that were fired, they are giving them, the Trump administration's position now, and I think it was done by executive orders to let them get their jobs back. We should do that to the doctors and nurses that were fired as well. So think about it. The doctors and nurses, if you were a doctor working in February, March of 2020, it was a pretty potent disease then, and there were doctors who died. But if you risked your life to help people, you got COVID, you survived, and you came back to work, and then they said, oh, you're fired because you don't have a vaccine. You're like, well, wait a minute, I got the disease. Why would I need to get vaccinated if I already got the disease? And you used common sense on them and they fired you. Those people ought to be reinstated. There's still thousands of doctors and nurses. Now, in some states, they tried to fix some of this. In Florida, they passed a law that said you cannot take a doctor's license for speech. Now, that would seem to be pretty obvious, but many states, including California, were saying if you were to say things that I said often, that children don't need to be vaccinated for COVID, they would say, oh, you can't say that, and they would try to take my license away. Nobody did, but in California, they did to other doctors who were saying similar things. There's a lot of things that need to be corrected. I think we've learned some lessons, but I fear, one, we're still paying for research that could turn into this nightmare again, gain-of-function research still happening in the U.S. and outside the U.S., funded by taxpayers. I'm still working on getting that stopped, but also we need to make sure that the essence of medical freedom exists in our country and that people are allowed to make choices for themselves and not be bullied.
Senator Paul, always appreciate you making the time for us. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Look, we were just talking about the debt. I mean, Trump's doing everything that he can. Senator Paul just said it. They're doing everything he can to get this thing under control, start turning things back in the direction of fiscal sanity. But it's going to take time. It's not going to be solved overnight. And there's going to be some rough seas ahead, if you know what I mean. Now's a good time for you to take action with gold. Look, if you have an old IRA or 401k, for example, you can have that turned into a 401k or IRA in gold with the Birch Gold Group. And that's one of the things that they do, but they can also get you gold in hand at home. I just got my gold delivery recently. It's discreet, easy, shows up, and you can keep that and know that you are building your own reserves of precious metals to prepare for the uncertain future with our currency and with the debt. Birch Gold specializes in helping you convert that existing IRA or 401k into a tax sheltered IRA in physical gold for no money out of pocket. Get your free info kit on gold by texting my name, Buck, to the number 989898. There's no obligation, just useful information. A+ rating from the Better Business Bureau, A+ rating from me. Connect with Birch Gold. Text Buck to 989898 and let the experts at Birch Gold help you secure your future today with gold.